I don't want to give too much away about myself, but I will say this. I grew up in a small, quiet town in Ontario, a place where people trusted each other, a place where nothing bad ever happened, until it did, until we realized that the very person who was supposed to be teaching us, guiding us, was watching us, recording us, and planning something worse. The first sub was great. The second one, not so much. 7th grade started out fine. Our regular teacher, Mr. Caldwell, was out on sick leave, so the school brought in a substitute, Mr. Irving. And he was great, the kind of teacher who actually cared, the kind who made learning fun, who made even math tolerable. I actually liked going to class, but after winter break everything changed, because Mr. Caldwell came back, and that's when things started to feel wrong. Mr. Caldwell was strange from the start, not in an obvious way, not the way movies make creeps look, with greasy hair and a twitchy smile. He looked normal, but there was something off. He never blinked enough. He would stare too long when talking to us, and sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he would smile to himself. Not a happy smile, a hungry one. We should have known then. We should have said something sooner. But when you're 12, you don't want to be dramatic. So we let it go. Until one day, he called me and my best friend, Rachel, over during recess. I have a fun little game, he said. Then he asked us to say different words for penis. Asked if we were comfortable talking about things like that. We were 12. We laughed nervously, brushed it off. But later, when we were alone, Rachel whispered, "That was weird, right?" And for the first time, I admitted it. Yeah, we told our parents, and they were furious. They called the school, demanding action. And the school? They said they'd handle it. That was a lie. Nothing changed. Mr. Caldwell stayed, and things got worse. A few months later, we were in gym class. It was the gymnastics unit, so most of us were in t-shirts and shorts, stretching on the mats. Rachel went to grab her water bottle. A few minutes later, I turned to look for her, and saw her standing completely still. She wasn't moving. She was holding something, a video camera. I didn't understand at first. Then I followed her gaze, to him, Mr. Caldwell, and his face. His face had changed completely, from casual boredom to pure horror. Like he had just been caught, like he knew his life was over. And then, he grabbed a soccer ball and threw it as hard as he could, straight at Rachel's face. The ball slammed into her. Rachel screamed, stumbled back. Then she dropped the camera and ran. I ran too. So did the rest of the class. Because by then, we all understood. We weren't just being taught by a creep. We were being hunted. We sprinted straight to the office, our footsteps pounding through the halls. But Mr. Caldwell? He wasn't following us. Because the moment that ball hit Rachel, he grabbed his camera and ran, not after us, not to check on Rachel. He ran out of the school. He never came back. Rachel's parents pressed charges, and guess what? The police searched his house. They found dozens of tapes, hours and hours of footage, our gym classes, our changing rooms, United States. He had been moving the camera every day to get the most revealing angles. And the school? They knew he was unstable. They knew he had problems. They let him come back anyway. They let him watch us and record us and plan whatever else he was going to do next. Mr. Caldwell was convicted. He was sentenced. But there was one last thing that always made me feel sick. One last thing that no one ever answered. When they searched his house, they found a second camera, one that was still running. It had been recording something. But when the police checked the files, they were gone. Erased. Like someone else had gotten to them first. I still wonder what was on that second camera. And I still wonder who was helping him. I was 9 years old when I learned what real fear felt like. I was in 4th grade at a newly built school. The architecture was unique, a U-shaped layout with hexagonal pods attached to the edges. Each pod contained 6 classrooms, all connected to a central area. This design meant that if you were walking close to the pods, someone else, just around the bend, could be right next to you without you ever seeing them. That fact would haunt me forever. It was parent-teacher night. My mom always attended these. She liked to stay informed about my grades. We arrived at the school, and after a general address from the principal, parents and students split up to meet their teachers. My mom had 2 meetings to attend, one for me and one for my older brother. She took me first to meet my teacher, Mrs. Holbrook. She had nothing but good things to say about me. It was quick, easy. Then we went to my brother's classroom. His teacher, Mr. Covey, was chatting with my mom when she turned to me and said, "Why don't you go play outside for a bit? We'll only be a few minutes." I nodded. It was still light outside. Everything seemed fine. I wandered around the playground area, staying close to the outer walls of the pods. No one else was outside. That's when it happened. A hand clamped down on the back of my neck, hard. My body froze. The grip was too strong for me to break free. Then, a voice. "Stay still, don't turn around." It was a whisper, but firm. Cold. I nodded. The hand tightened. "Now walk." I obeyed. He guided me around the pod, moving closer to the parking lot. "Do you see that car?" I looked. There was a green station wagon with wooden paneling. I nodded. "Walk to that car, get inside, wait for me. Don't turn around, I'll know if you do." The grip tightened again for emphasis. My heart pounded. I started walking. Halfway to the car, I froze. I couldn't move. I just stood there crying. Then, I made a choice. I turned around. There was no one there. Was he hiding behind the pod, waiting to see if I'd follow orders? I didn't care. I ran. I circled wide around the pod, staying far from the walls until I saw 2 boys playing marbles near where it had happened. One of them, Roger, was a year older than me. I didn't trust them. I kept my distance, but they barely even noticed me. Later, I told my older brother about it, and he insisted that Roger was a nice guy. So if it wasn't him, who was it? One possibility haunts me. There was a 3rd grade teacher at my school, Dr. Schofield. I hated him. He was short-tempered, violent. He once grabbed me by the arm when I got up from my desk without permission. He always made me uneasy. He was arrested in 1980 for molesting 4 boys. That was 1 year after my experience. I still don't know if it was him, but I have a sick feeling that it was. But what creeps me out even now, 20 years later, is that the only reason I'm here is because I froze up. I was too scared to get in that car and turned around. Thank God I didn't listen. It happened when I was in 5th grade. Our regular music teacher had to take medical leave after surgery, so they brought in a substitute, Mr. Gorman. I hated him the moment I met him. He was old, sweaty, and massive. Not just overweight, but overpowering. The kind of guy who took up space and made you feel small. His fidgety hands were always moving. His shifty eyes darted around the room like he was hiding something. I could tell he was watching me. And I was right. I was one of the few girls who wore skirts at school, not regular skirts, skorts. They looked like skirts, but had shorts built underneath so no one could see anything. Mr. Gorman hated them. "Those are way too short. You shouldn't wear something like that." I told him they had shorts sewn in. He smirked. "I don't think so. I can see through you." I didn't understand what that meant at the time. Now, it makes me sick. Every day he watched me. Not subtly, not casually. Full-on, laser-focused staring. It didn't matter where I sat. His eyes followed me. If I moved, his head turned, like a predator tracking prey. And it wasn't just the staring. He singled me out, always asking me to answer questions. Even when I wasn't raising my hand, even when I had no idea what he was asking. It felt like he was finding excuses to talk to me, to make me feel small. After weeks of this, I finally told my mom. She's not the kind of woman to let things slide. So she went straight to the principal. A meeting was scheduled. It would be Mr. Gorman, the principal, the vice principal, my mom and dad and my dad. He's 6'2", 250 pounds of muscle. He didn't say a single word to Mr. Gorman. He just stared, like a hunter watching its prey. At first, Mr. Gorman denied everything. Then, he changed his story, multiple times. But here's the thing. The meeting was being recorded. They played the tape back, and every lie he told was exposed. They fired him immediately. No hesitation. He was gone the next day. I still wonder, if I never said anything, how far would he have gone, and how many girls came before me? Freshman year of high school, I wasn't exactly the most social person. I used to be outgoing, but a mix of shyness, self-consciousness, and weird attention from guys made me withdraw. So I kept to myself. Teachers often checked in on me, probably thinking I was lonely. But one teacher in particular, Mr. Zane, was too interested. Mr. Zane was my English teacher, tall, balding, creepy blue eyes that always seemed a little too wide open. First day of school, he asked us all our names and interests. When he got to me, I spoke quietly because I hated being stared at. He laughed. From that day forward, he called me Good Heart. At first, I thought he was just a little eccentric. Then I realized he never looked me in the eyes, not once. Instead, his eyes roamed, from my chest to my legs to the floor, anywhere but my face. And when he did finally meet my eyes, he didn't blink. It made my skin crawl. After a while, I noticed he treated me differently. If he took away bathroom privileges from the whole class, he'd suddenly say, "Take this note to the office, Good Heart. And hey, go to the bathroom if you need to." When report cards came out, I had A's on assignments I never even did. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything, because English was a required class to graduate. Midway through the year, he started inviting me to his classroom during lunch. "Help me grade papers," he'd say. But we never graded anything. Instead, he had movies playing. Movies with long, uncomfortable sex scenes, every single time. "Want to skip this part?" he asked once. I shrugged, trying to seem mature. He never skipped it. The last time I ever went to his classroom, the sex scene dragged on. I was frozen. Then, I felt his hand on my leg. "Don't worry, Good Heart. It'll be over soon." His hand never moved. I left as soon as the bell rang. I didn't say bye, I just ran. I thought I'd never see him again. Until last week. I work at Petco now. Busy day, long line of customers. Then, I saw him, standing in my line. The other register was empty, but he waited for me. When it was his turn, he stared. I avoided eye contact, scanning his items. At the end of the transaction, he smiled. "I'll be back again, Good Heart." I never told him where I worked, and I have a terrible feeling he's already been back. Everyone called him Mr. Lark. At first, he seemed like a harmless, awkward guy, the kind of teacher students felt bad for. He taught inclusion classes, helping students with learning disabilities and other challenges. Most teachers at my school were strict, professional, distant, but not him. He wanted to be close to his students. And that was the first red flag. Freshman year, I made a huge mistake. I told Mr. Lark I liked his haircut. It was a throwaway compliment, something to be polite. But from that day forward, he started acting weird around me. Every time he saw me, he'd linger. He'd position himself nearby. It was subtle at first. Then, it escalated. A few months later, I broke my toe at a haunted house. I never told anyone at school, not my classmates, not my teachers. But the first time I walked into school with a limp, Mr. Lark stopped me in the hallway. "You should stay away from haunted houses. They can be dangerous." He said it casually, like it was common knowledge. But I never told him. How the hell did he know? Sophomore year, he started waiting for me at lunch. I used to sit alone until my friends arrived. But now, he was always there first. He'd sit at my table, chatting like we were old friends. The moment my friends showed up, he'd leave. It was almost like he didn't want witnesses. One day, I mentioned in passing that I had a dentist appointment and would be leaving school early. Minutes later, he left too. At the time, I felt relieved, until I got to my car, and it wouldn't start. That's when I saw him, standing outside, waiting. He smiled and walked over. "Need a ride home?" I froze. How did he know where I lived? Senior year, I transferred schools. I thought I was finally free. Then a few months later, I got a new job as a delivery driver. One day, I got an order with a strange note. "Come to the back door, just walk in." Sometimes elderly customers left notes like that. I thought nothing of it. But when I stepped inside, I felt sick. It was him, Mr. Lark. He smiled. "I missed you." Then, he tried to kiss me. I shoved him away. "You didn't call on our anniversary. But I understand. It's hard after switching schools." Anniversary? We'd never been in a relationship. He thought we had a 2-year relationship? My boss called at that exact moment, yelling about my late delivery. I grabbed the money and lied. "I have to go quit my job in person. I'll be back." He lit up. "I knew you'd come around." I never went back. I told my parents everything. We moved. I never heard from him again, and I never trusted a teacher again. It was the summer before 8th grade at St. Bridget's Academy, a strict Catholic middle school. I wasn't exactly a social butterfly. I transferred in 6th grade to stay with my best friend Maddie, who had been there for years. But Maddie was a year ahead of me, and I never really clicked with the kids in my own grade. So after school, I'd just hang out with her and her friends. That's how I met Mr. Trenholm. The teachers at St. Bridget's were the kind of people who sucked the air out of a room. They were all stiff, humorless, and acted like God himself was watching over their shoulders, waiting for them to mess up. But Mr. Trenholm? He was different. He had wild, messy hair, a half-tucked shirt, and a grumbly voice that made him sound like a hungover college kid instead of a teacher. He wasn't conventionally attractive, but he had a kind of boyish charm, youthful brown eyes, and a dry sense of humor that instantly made him popular. He had this way of talking to students that made you feel like you were in on some kind of joke. I never had a class with him, but Maddie did. She raved about him, how fun he was, how he was one of us, so I trusted her. That was my mistake. Maddie told me she was volunteering at a summer camp that Mr. Trenholm ran. Every morning a shuttle bus picked up the kids from our school and drove them out to a lakeside camp in the woods. The problem, I couldn't afford to go. My parents were barely scraping by, and St. Bridget's was already bleeding them dry with tuition. But Mr. Trenholm, oh, kind, wonderful Mr. Trenholm, offered me a deal. "Come help out," Maddie told me. "He says you can go for almost nothing if you help supervise the little kids." I should have been wary, but I was young. I just felt lucky. And for the first few weeks, it was actually fun. Mr. Trenholm ran the camp like one big family. The older kids helped out, and the younger ones adored him. He roughhoused with the boys, played guitar by the bonfire, and even let the girls braid his hair when they begged him. He was grumpy sometimes, sure, but it was always in a playful, dad-like way. I started to think, this guy isn't like the other teachers at all. But something changed. At some point, I noticed how he looked at Maddie. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the longer the summer went on, the more obvious it became. He was always near her, always watching her, always touching her shoulder, squeezing her arm, giving her those lingering glances. One night by the fire, I caught him staring at her like she was a secret he wanted to keep. It made my skin crawl. Summer ended, and school was about to start again. Then we heard Mr. Trenholm wasn't coming back. At first, no one knew why. But rumors started spreading. Fast. He had been emailing female students, asking them to meet him at the school, to help him set up his classroom, and then maybe go out after. Maybe go back to his place. It was Maddie who came forward. I didn't even hear it from her. I heard it from my mom. That's how bad it was. I felt sick. Maddie never told me. We told each other everything. And now I had to find out through whispers? They said Mr. Trenholm had broken down after the accusations. He told his friend, the other teacher at our school, that he was sick and he needed help. A week later, he was dead. A month passed. I was at Maddie's house, sitting on her bed, waiting for her to get out of the bathroom. She took forever. I got bored, so I reached for one of her notebooks. We loved writing stories. We'd swap notebooks and give each other feedback. So I didn't feel like I was snooping until I realized what I was reading. 25 pages. 25. It started as flirting between her and Mr. Trenholm. Then they were sitting too close. Then she noticed the look in his eyes. Then I snapped the notebook shut. I didn't read the rest. I didn't want to. I never mentioned it. Never asked. Never wanted to know. But sometimes when I think about it, I wonder, did something happen before she said anything? Or was she part of it all along? Because the thing that still haunts me is that Mr. Trenholm died 2 days after he was hospitalized. And the cause? Suicide. But sometimes I wonder if it was really his choice. I was 5 years old when my parents decided I needed to learn an instrument. It was a big deal in my family, the whole gifted child thing. It couldn't be just any instrument. It had to be piano or violin. I picked violin because every other girl in my family was already playing piano. I wanted to be different. That choice led me to Mr. Chan. And looking back now, I wish I had chosen piano. My parents didn't speak great English, so they wanted a Chinese-speaking instructor. That's how we found Mr. Chan. He was soft-spoken in his mid-30s and had a calm, patient demeanor. Best of all, he did house visits. That was a huge bonus. It meant no long train rides to lessons. It meant convenience. It meant safety. Or so my parents thought. Mr. Chan was so nice. Every lesson he brought me candy. And when we finished, he always gave me a hug. I thought nothing of it. But over time, his touches changed. He would adjust my fingers instead of just telling me where to place them. He would move my arms to correct my posture. His hands would linger just a little too long. And the way he looked at me, like he was studying me, like he was memorizing every detail. One day, Mr. Chan just stopped coming. No warning, no explanation. My parents found a new teacher. I cried. I threw a huge tantrum. I thought he was the nicest man ever. And I missed the candy. My parents never told me why he stopped coming. Not until years later. I was 12 when my family finally told me Mr. Chan had been arrested for molesting another student, a girl my age. And suddenly, everything clicked. The lingering touches, the staring, the excessive physical contact. I wonder now, was I just lucky? Or was he waiting for the right moment? Everyone at my high school thought Mr. Sykes was just a strict teacher. But the truth was so much worse. Mr. Sykes was our new physics teacher. The last teacher retired, so the school board hired him on short notice. Day one, we all noticed something was off. He was beyond strict. He would explode over the smallest mistakes. If someone wrote a formula wrong, he'd go ballistic. Within a week, 5 students had cried in his class. One kid asked to use the bathroom. Mr. Sykes just stared at him until he sat back down. My chemistry teacher was the science department lead. She didn't like what she was seeing. One day, she went to confront him about his behavior. But when she walked into his classroom, he wasn't there. Instead, she found a sleeping bag tucked in the corner, a pillow, a set of his clothes hanging in the teacher's locker. It looked like he was living there, but she brushed it off. Maybe he worked late and crashed here. Maybe it was nothing. She forgot about it. She shouldn't have. A few months later, it was football season. My chemistry teacher's son was in the marching band. She had to pick him up after a game. It was 11 p.m. when she pulled into the school parking lot. And Mr. Sykes's car? Still there. She thought, that's weird, but maybe he's just grading papers. Then it happened again and again. So one night, she decided to check. She drove past the school on the way home from Walmart. It was Saturday night, 11:30 p.m. His car was still parked there. The following week, the students were told, "Mr. Sykes is leaving. You can either drop physics without penalty or take it online. No explanation, no farewell speech, just gone." Then Christmas break started. One night, the school janitor was cleaning the building. He texted my chemistry teacher. "Mr. Sykes is standing in his empty classroom, just staring at the wall." She told him, "If he's still there when you leave, call the principal. Maybe even the police." 5 hours later, he was still there. The janitor called the principal. The principal called the vice principal. Then they called the cops. They had to escort him out. After Christmas break, my chemistry teacher was asked to clean out his classroom. She started going through his drawers. And what she found? Horrifying. Inside were razors, rat poison, bottles of acid. No one knows what he was planning. But I know one thing. We were never safe. When I was in 5th grade, my teacher, Ms. Linton, was the sweetest lady you could imagine. She called students baby and sugar and had a soft, patient way of talking. The kind of teacher who made school feel safe. She let you retake tests if you did badly. She kept a jar of hard candies on her desk and passed them out when you were sad. She even sang to us sometimes, little hums and old gospel songs under her breath. She was the type of teacher who remembered your birthday, who noticed if you were struggling. The kind of person who was just good. Then she got sick. And everything changed. At first, it was just the flu. She took a week off, then another. When she finally came back, she looked worse than when she left. Her face was pale. Her hand shook when she wrote on the board. She seemed agitated, like her own skin was trapping her, like she was itching to crawl out of herself. She muttered to herself a lot. I should probably see a doctor, but she never did. And then her mouth started to sag, like one side of her face wasn't working anymore. Her nails, she chewed them down to the flesh until they bled. Something was very, very wrong. One day a boy in our class, Stephen, was struggling with an assignment. He had learning difficulties, and usually Ms. Linton was so patient with him. She'd kneel beside his desk, talk him through the work, give him extra time. But that day, she snapped, slammed her hands on his desk. The whole class jumped. She leaned down, her mouth twisting in anger. "You're so stupid." The words hung in the air. "Why can't you do anything right?" Stephen's face went red. His eyes welled with tears. None of us knew what to do. We just stared, waiting for her to realize what she had said. But she just stood there, breathing heavy, her hands shaking, her eyes distant, like she wasn't really there anymore, like something else had crawled into her skin. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fear, but I stepped forward. "Ms. Linton, maybe you should sit down." Her head snapped toward me. Her eyes were wild, wide, and bloodshot, like she hadn't blinked in hours. She bared her teeth, and then she lunged straight at me. I barely had time to stumble back. Her fingers scratched at my arms. Her teeth. I swear to God, she tried to bite me, her mouth foaming, her lips pulled back in a snarl. Her breath was hot, rancid. The whole class screamed, kids scrambling out of their desks, knocking over chairs, and then she collapsed. She hit the floor so hard the sound echoed through the room. Her body jerked violently, her limbs twisting unnaturally. Foam poured from her mouth. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Someone ran to get the nurse. Another kid started crying. I just stood there, frozen, watching as my sweet, patient teacher turned into something inhuman. Ms. Linton never came back after that day. We heard she was taken to the hospital, but she didn't make it. She died that night. No one understood why, until the police searched her house. That's when they found her dog, dead, and worse, a raccoon carcass inside the house. Both had tested positive for rabies, and so had she. She'd had it for weeks. The doctor said she had been in the late stages by the time she lunged at me, that her brain was already shutting down, that she wasn't even really herself anymore. I still have nightmares about her, about the way her eyes looked when she turned on me, about her snarling mouth, about the foam on her lips. Sometimes in the dreams, I don't move fast enough. I feel her teeth sink into my arm, and when I wake up, for just a split second, I swear I can still feel her breath on my skin. I never take my pet's vaccinations lightly, because I know what happens when you ignore the signs. It started like any other school day. I was in 5th grade and our regular teacher was out sick. The woman standing at the front of the class was a substitute. She was older, dressed in a simple beige cardigan with a long skirt, and had dark circles under her eyes. "Your teacher is sick," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "So I will be filling in." Nothing about her seemed off at first. That wouldn't last. We worked in silence as she passed out worksheets. She paced the room, watching us with a strange intensity. Then she started muttering to herself. At first it was quiet, a few words here and there. Then it got louder. "God sees you. He is watching. He talks to me." Everyone started exchanging glances. The muttering continued, her breath getting uneven. And then she started walking around the room. Her hands grazed the tops of our heads as she passed. Then her grip tightened. She squeezed the back of one boy's neck just a little too hard. He flinched. She kept walking. She did it again and again, until finally someone got up and left. They said they needed the bathroom, but we all knew the truth. They went to tell the principal. The substitute kept talking. Her voice was thick with emotion. "The Lord sees everything. He will know if you lie. He will punish you." Her breathing was ragged. Her eyes darted from one student to another. Then she started laughing, a choked, gasping laugh. "They don't understand," she whispered. "They don't see what I see." And then she snapped. She grabbed a book and threw it across the room. We all jumped. Then she slammed her hands onto a desk. "You are all sinners." Someone started crying. She turned to the boy struggling with his worksheet. "You think you're confused now?" she snarled. "You'll be really confused when you're burning in hell." And then she lunged. She grabbed the boy's shirt and started shaking him. He was sobbing, gasping for breath. We were frozen. Then she turned to me. Her wild eyes locked onto mine, and she lunged again. Her hands reached for me, fingers clawing the air. I scrambled backward. She was foaming at the mouth. Her teeth were bared. She was trying to bite me. A full-grown woman, trying to bite a child. The door burst open. 2 teachers and the principal rushed in. She collapsed to the floor, her body seizing. White foam dribbled from her lips. Her eyes rolled back. Someone called 911. She was taken away in an ambulance. We sat there for hours, too scared to move. Later, I found out she died. The cause? Rabies. Her dog was found dead in her home. So was a raccoon. All 3 had tested positive for rabies, and she had been teaching while her brain was literally deteriorating. I still dream about her face, about her foam-covered mouth, and about what could have happened if the principal had arrived a few seconds later. When I was 14 years old, I had a teacher who made my skin crawl. His name was Mr. Gorham. He taught English, I believe going on 20-plus years. But he had only been at my current school for only a couple years. He gave us tons of assignments, mostly busy work, so we'd be too distracted to notice him. But I noticed, and I wasn't the only one. It started early in the year. We were reading a story by Edgar Allan Poe when Mr. Gorham paused and said, "Imagine this, a serial killer is choosing his victims." We all sat there waiting for him to continue. Then, he pointed at random girls in the class. He wouldn't pick just anyone. He'd choose someone with certain traits. He walked up to a girl with blonde highlights and brushed a strand of her hair between his fingers. Maybe he likes blondes. Then he pointed to me. Or maybe someone like her. I had dark brown hair. Why would he choose me? Something about the way he stared at me made my stomach turn, like he wasn't imagining a scenario, like he was remembering one. After that, he made it impossible to ignore him. Every time I looked up, he was already watching me. Not quick glances, long, unblinking stares. If I raised my hand to answer a question, he smirked, like he enjoyed watching me squirm, like he was testing me. I started to dread his class, and then I left. Halfway through the year, I switched to a different school. I couldn't take it anymore. The stares, the comments, the way he always seemed too close behind me. I thought I was done with him. I was so wrong. A year later, one of my old friends called me. You won't believe this, I already knew before she even said it. Mr. Gorham had been arrested. Possession of child porn. A relationship with a 16-year-old student. Prime suspect of the disappearance of 3 teenage girls over a decade ago. They searched his house. They found hard drives filled with images. Images of girls who never knew they were being watched. Some of the images included the missing girls. I felt sick, because I knew. Deep down, I'd always known. And I still wonder, how close did I come to being one of those girls? High school was strictly business at my school. Teachers weren't your friends. They weren't the type to check in on students or try to get close. They came, taught their lessons, and left. Except for Dr. Johansson. He taught civics. I had him in my freshman year, and he wasn't like the other teachers. He was cool. At least that's what people said. And maybe that's why no one questioned it at first. Dr. Johansson was one of those teachers who wanted to be involved in his students' lives. So he did something no other teacher had ever done. He made a Facebook account, and he started adding people. It's just to keep in touch, he'd say, to help students with homework, answer questions, make learning easier. And of course, people loved it. It made school feel less formal, like he was one of us, until the weird stuff started. At first, it was harmless, strange posts on his page. One time, he posted the song Straight Outta Compton by NWA with a caption that read, "All they say is the N-word, 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 I don't get it." People commented immediately, asking him what the hell he was thinking. The post disappeared a few minutes later. Then he posted an apology. "Sorry, I was drunk." That should have been the first red flag. But no one really cared. He was just eccentric, until the messages started. Dr. Johansson got a few students' phone numbers. No one thought much of it at first. Maybe he just needed to check in about assignments. But then he started texting late at night, and his messages got weirder. "Need help with homework? You can come over to my place. We can go over it over a glass of wine." This was a teacher, inviting high school students over for wine. Even worse, he was a civics teacher. He taught the laws he was actively breaking. I never got a text from him, but my friends did. And then, one night he messaged me. "Enter the rabbit hole with me." I was online scrolling through Facebook when his message popped up. "How do you get girls?" I stared at my screen. "What? Do you have a big doc?" I sat there, frozen. "You must be such a stallion in bed." I could feel my face burning. I hadn't even responded. Then he sent the next message. "Come on, enter the rabbit hole with me. I'll take care of you." I clicked out of the chat. I didn't even know what the hell that meant. The next time I saw him at school, I felt sick, and he acted like nothing happened. He stopped messaging me after that, but he found someone else. My best friend. And Dr. Johansson took it a step further. One night, my friend got a photo message, a picture of Dr. Johansson's bare ass, with the caption, "Please take me from behind, and take me hard." My friend was 17. Johansson was in his mid-30s. It finally reached the school. Someone reported him, and he went to court. You'd think a teacher sending explicit messages and photos to multiple students would get serious punishment. But the justice system is a joke. Dr. Johansson was sentenced to community service and had to pay a small fine to my friend. That was it. And guess what? He still teaches today. at a different school, a new school, where no one knows what he did. And the worst part, he still adds students on Facebook.